Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Monday, January the 1st. And welcome to our commentary. Happy New Year. I don't remember the last time. I guess it happens every 7 or 8 years, I guess. But the last time that December 1st was a Monday. So I guess, yeah, it happens every 7 years, I guess. But Happy New Year to all of you. I hope you had a good day. I hope you had a good December 31st party if you went to one or if you stayed home. Whatever you did, I hope you had a wonderful time with your family and with your friends, and that you're ready to go for what should be an exciting 2024. I almost said 19 because it just seems like these years are going by so fast. But 2024 lies ahead of us. One of the characteristics of January the 1st, of course, over the years, has been all these college football games, these bowl games that we have grown accustomed to. And now they've changed it all around. And now the bowl games are part of a playoff system where, you know, this team ends up here and that team ends up there. And it's all part of this elimination or playoff system that they created. I'm not I'm not upset with the playoff system, but I'm a big fan of the more traditional bowl games. The Cotton Bowl here in Dallas used to be on the first of the year, and it would always feature a Texas team, Arkansas, Oklahoma, teams like that who would always play at the Cotton Bowl. So you had not only a regional interest, but the game itself would always be against, let's say, the winner of another conference. And I used to love that. I used to love the Cotton Bowl when it was that way. The Rose Bowl, of course, for a long time was it included the Pac-10. I think it was the Pac-10 and the Big Ten. So you had that in the big ceremony, of course, coming from Pasadena, the Rose Parade. And then you had, I guess, the Orange Bowl, the different bowls, and the one in New Orleans, I think it was called the Sugar Bowl. So you had all these different bowls, but all of them had a regional interest or regional participation by teams in those areas. And I think that that's what made it more interesting. Now it's all a playoff system. Now you end up wherever you end up. That doesn't mean that the games are bad. It doesn't mean that the teams are bad, but you do get away from that more traditional regional emphasis that you had in these bowl games before. So maybe I'm a traditionalist. Maybe it's generational, probably more generational than anything else. If you grow up loving the Cotton Bowl, then it probably means more to you than it is right now. But there's some great teams: Michigan, Alabama. You got Texas. You got Washington. That's all going to be settled later today, and it should be a great year for college football. I just wish, I guess, my own. Again, I think it's more generational than anything else. I just wish we could go back to those days with the Cotton Bowl and the Rose Bowl, the way it used to be. But I guess we're not going back to that. So let it be. Let it be the way it is. I have a post over at the American Thinker today, remembering January 1st, 1959. And that, of course, was the day that communism came to Cuba. Now, it didn't come right away. It took about a couple of years for it to consolidate itself. But this was the day that Castro came into power. And this was the beginning, I think, of what I call in the article, the beginning of the destruction of Cuba. Now, I was a little boy back then, but obviously I lived it through the experience of my parents, and we fled the island in 1964, like many other Cubans did. But January the 1st always has this eerie feeling, as I write in my article, because it's a question that I think a lot of Cubans, particularly of my parents' generation, have always asked themselves, and that is, how did this happen? How did we let this happen? How is it possible that communism came to Cuba when nobody really predicted that? And, I've had people very well known in Cuban history who've told me that if anybody had said 65 years ago today that this was the beginning of a communist dictatorship, they would have laughed at you. They would have said, no, that'll never happen. The United States will never allow that to happen. That was the other argument. So, but anyway, you know what happened? Castro has been in power for 65 years. Castro has now been dead for 7 years. His brother, even though he's not officially in power, probably still runs things from the background. His brother, of course, is almost 90 years old himself. And I don't know what kind of health he's in, but there are rumors that he's not. There is a president of Cuba now selected by the Communist Party, and he's a younger man. He was born actually after 1959. I think he was born in the early 60s. And, he's part of the regime, and Cuba today continues to be the basket case, the economic basket case that it's been for quite some time. And I think this is the hardest thing. I know for my parents' generation, this was the hardest thing to see the way Cuba was destroyed. Cuba went from being a prosperous middle-class country as it was in the late 50s with a strong economy, with a high level of prosperity. There were many political problems. I'm not trying to overlook that. There were some political problems, and there were some problems also in the way that the wealth was distributed. But there was a sizable middle class. There was a very stable economy. And one of the things that I talk about in my article is that in the first 50 years, if you look at Cuba, the first half of the 20th century, the pre-Castro period, the pre-communist period, Cuba was blessed with huge migrations of Europeans, most of them from Spain, but lots of different European countries. There were many Jewish Europeans who moved to Cuba. There were many Asians who moved to Cuba. Cuba had a very significant Chinese population. I mean, there was Chinese sections in Havana that were pretty amazing. So, I mean, the country, for all of its political problems, for all of its, growing up problems, remember the country only became independent in 1902. For all of those problems, nevertheless, the country was prospering. And as I said, there was a strong middle class. And then comes this communist regime, and, it all kinds of falls apart. It falls apart. I think at first many Cubans thought it would go away. They didn't think it would last. I think a lot of Cubans thought the United States would never put up with it. In other words, the United States would never allow a communist satellite 90 miles away. I think that was an expectation that many Cubans had, particularly of my parents' generation. But the bottom line is that, we left and he stayed and he consolidated his dictatorship. And here we are. 65 years later, the country's a mess, a disaster. It has an aging population because there's very little, the birth rates are very low, and young people get out as soon as they can. So it's a real tragedy. It's a real tragedy, Cuba. Now, both of my parents are gone, and most of the Cubans of that generation are now gone. And left behind are people like me who was born in Cuba, who grew up in the United States. But we still have memories. We still have thoughts about this day, not necessarily this day, but certainly what happened in Cuba as a consequence of this day. So check out my article. I have it over at the American Thinker. They're also running it, by the way, at Babalu, the Cuban American blog. So whether you follow me at American Thinker or you check my post at Babalu, you can always, of course, get it on Twitter or on my blog as well. But Cuba, 1959, the 65 years of communism and destruction. That's the name of the post over at the American Thinker, and as well as Babalu. Well, I have a post coming out Tuesday morning where I'm talking about President Trump, and I'm doing a little bit of an early prediction or prognostication. Is that what they call it? No. Let me say the right word. Prediction about 2024, where I write that if the election were held today, Trump would win. Trump would win, and he is ahead in the general polls over a couple of points over President Biden and what they call the RCP average. That's basically head-to-head polling. That doesn't include a third-party candidate, which I think could be a real factor this year with Robert Kennedy. If he can get on 50 ballots, I think Robert Kennedy could get as much as 10%. Some people say even 15%. And that could, I think, hurt whoever the Democrat nominee is, Biden, at the moment. But I believe that if the election were held today, that President Trump would win. He would go back to to the White House, and it's basically dissatisfaction with Biden. It's just total, complete dissatisfaction with Biden. There's just a sense that the country is being poorly run. This situation on the border is just, I mean, it is I don't know how anybody can explain it. I mean, I have not heard a single Democrat defend what this administration is doing on the border because it cannot be defended. They've basically allowed 6 to 7 million people to come into the country on the basis of an asylum meeting that they're going to have. How do you do something like that? I was watching Representative Henry Cuellar. He's a Democrat from the border, representative, U.S. House. And he was saying that out of 100 people who seek asylum, something like 87% are rejected. And his point was, why are we allowing 100 in? Why don't we just right at the border or have them stay in Mexico, which is what the previous administration, the Trump administration, had done. So that way that when they come in, they've already been accepted or their asylum request has been accepted. That's the way it was working under Trump. But the Biden administration changed it. And I think they've messed it up very badly, very badly. And I believe the border is one of the real problems of this administration. And one more point I made in my post is that I believe foreign policy is going to be a major issue in 2024. I'm not predicting a war, but I think tensions around the world are going to get very high. There could be a war, but I think tensions are going to be very high. And foreign policy is going to be a big topic, a big preoccupation of the American people. And that, I think, is going to benefit President Trump, which, by the way, in my post, I also recommend to President Trump that he nominate somebody for vice president who has a strong foreign policy credential, because I think that's going to be one of the big stories of 2024. I recommended Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, as a potential vice president because of his vast experience in foreign policy. But anyway, Happy New Year to you. I appreciate very much all your clicks and all your comments. And we got a whole year ahead of us. So we're getting together with commentary and with some of our guests, as we do from time to time. And you have a wonderful January the 1st. I hope your team wins. And we'll talk to you later. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.